There is a fear so deep and so universal that it has its own clinical name: taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. It is not an irrational fear. It is not a modern invention. It is a terror that has haunted human beings for centuries, because throughout history, it has actually happened. People pronounced dead by doctors, placed in coffins, lowered into the ground, and sealed away from the world. Some of them were never discovered in time. But a few, a remarkable, extraordinary few, came back. And none of their stories is more astonishing, more documented, or more strangely triumphant than the story of a 19-year-old French boy named Angelo Hays. A boy who was declared dead, buried in the ground, pulled back out alive, and went on to become one of the most famous men in France. To understand how this happened, you first need to understand the world of 1930s rural France. Medical technology in small towns was limited. Doctors had stethoscopes and basic instruments, but diagnosing death was far less precise than it is today. There was no portable ECG, no brain activity monitoring, no definitive test that could be administered quickly at the scene of an accident. If a doctor checked for a pulse and found none, if the patient was unresponsive and showed no visible signs of life, they were declared dead. It was as simple and as terrifying as that. And in the summer of 1937, in a small French village called Saint-Quentin-de-Caplong, that flawed system was about to fail a teenager in the most dramatic way imaginable. Angelo Hays was 19 years old, and by all accounts a typical young man of his era. Energetic, adventurous, and fond of riding his motorcycle through the French countryside. On July 6, 1937, Angelo was riding near his home when he lost control and crashed headfirst into a brick wall. The impact was catastrophic. His face and skull took the full force of the collision. When people arrived at the scene, Angelo was completely unresponsive. His injuries were severe, and he had no detectable pulse. A doctor was called. The doctor examined him, found no signs of life, and Angelo Hays was officially declared dead. He was 19 years old. His parents were devastated. His injuries were so severe, his face so badly damaged from the impact, that the doctors advised his family against viewing the body. It would be too distressing, too final, too much for a parent to bear. And so Angelo's coffin was closed. 3 days after the accident, he was buried in the local cemetery. His family mourned. The village mourned. And that, everyone assumed, was the end. But 2 days after the funeral, something unexpected happened. An insurance investigator arrived in the village. Angelo's father had recently taken out a life insurance policy worth 200,000 francs on his son, a significant sum. The insurance company, following standard procedure for large payouts, sent an agent to verify the circumstances of the death before releasing the money. The agent requested that Angelo's body be exhumed for a proper examination. It was a routine bureaucratic step. Nobody expected anything unusual. The coffin was dug up, the lid was opened, and the investigator stopped dead in his tracks. Angelo Hays' body was warm. Not slightly warm, not ambiguously warm. Warm in a way that a body sealed underground for 2 days should absolutely not be. The investigator immediately called for medical assistance. Doctors arrived and confirmed what seemed impossible. Angelo was alive. Unconscious, barely clinging to life, but alive. He was rushed to a hospital in Bordeaux, where surgeons worked urgently to save him. They operated on his skull. They treated his injuries. And over the weeks and months that followed, through intensive medical care, Angelo Hays made a full and complete recovery. So how did he survive? How does a human being spend 5 days, 3 before burial, 2 underground, in a sealed coffin and emerge alive? The medical explanation, as best as doctors could determine, was that the impact of Angelo's crash had driven his brain into an extraordinarily deep coma. Not a light, unconscious state, but a profound shutdown of bodily functions so complete that even trained medical professionals with the equipment of the 1930s could not detect signs of life. In this comatose state, Angelo's body required almost no oxygen to sustain itself. His metabolism slowed to a fraction of its normal rate. His heart beat so faintly, so slowly that no stethoscope caught it. And crucially, because his coffin was made of wood and not perfectly sealed, tiny traces of air continued to reach him. Just enough. Just barely enough to keep him alive while the world above him went through the rituals of mourning and burial. The story of Angelo Hays spread across France and eventually across the world. Newspapers carried the headline of the boy who came back from the dead. He became something of a national celebrity, invited to speak, interviewed extensively, recognized wherever he went. But Angelo did not spend his second chance at life simply enjoying the attention. He did something that perfectly captures the character of a man who had stared at the inside of a coffin and survived. He invented something. Angelo Hays spent years designing and building what he called a security coffin. A coffin specifically engineered for people who might find themselves in his situation. His design included a food locker, a chemical toilet, a radio transmitter that could send a signal to the surface, a small library of books, and a hatch that could be opened from the inside. He toured country fairs and exhibitions across France demonstrating his invention. In 1974, nearly 4 decades after his accident, Angelo buried himself in his security coffin at a public exhibition and remained underground for 30 hours, emerging perfectly fine to a watching crowd. He was not a man defined by his trauma. He was a man who turned his trauma into something that could help others. Angelo Hays was not the only person in history to have been buried alive and survived. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, the fear of premature burial was so widespread that it had a name, taphophobia, and it drove real changes in how societies handled death. Hospitals in London began holding bodies in mortuaries for days, waiting for signs of decomposition before allowing burial. Wealthy individuals commissioned elaborate safety coffins with bells attached to strings inside, so that anyone who woke underground could ring for help. The phrase, "saved by the bell," is widely believed by some historians to have its origins in exactly this practice. The fear was real because the danger was real. But among all the stories of premature burial across the centuries, Angelo Hays stands alone. Not just because he survived, but because of what he did afterwards. He did not hide from the story. He did not spend his life in the shadow of what had happened to him. He took the most terrifying experience a human being can imagine and turned it into a career, an invention, a legacy. He lived to the age of 77. And somewhere in the French countryside, there is almost certainly a security coffin sitting in a museum, a permanent reminder that the most extraordinary chapter of a person's life is sometimes the one that starts after everyone else has given up on them. We cover the most mind-blowing true stories from around the world every single week. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because you will not want to miss what is coming next. See you in the next one.